this is conversations we've been having, Sean, for a while, navigating realities. And when we talk about the topic that we're told not to talk about, race, religion, and politics, and given your experience, we are looking forward to having this conversation with you, particularly your life in public service. You've been in public service for a long time. So one of the things we start off is just asking questions about your background. Where'd you grow up? What's your childhood like? What's your family like?
Yeah.
Was race and religion and politics talked about in your childhood?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I hear a question like that. I'm always like, well, that's a broad question. And how far back do I go? I say it just in the sense of, born in Jamaica, and my mom's Jamaican, my dad's from New Zealand. And, from a very young age, though, my brother and I obviously we lived in Jamaica, but then we also lived in Australia. We were in New Zealand for a bit, Venezuela, and eventually, came to the United States. But when you talk about like what was it like as a child, I'm like, well, it was kind of varied, and I always try to remember back like which ones are my memories and which ones are just my parents telling stories, and you kind of remember those things. But for me, some of my earliest memories were, just snippets of some of those different places, and what that was like. But broadly, growing up was, when my parents moved here and they moved to New Jersey, that was kind of where I grew up. I say for sure. But it was, it's interesting because when you ask that question, I'd say it was a little bit of all of those things, but in different ways. My mom, and especially in Jamaica, and even growing up and part of school, Presbyterian, and big piece of her life for sure. My dad, atheist, and interesting to hear those conversations as a kid. And yeah, and I always say, like, faith for me, it was always just I got to kind of hear the debate, kind of hear the discussion around what that looks like. And my mom won out in terms of some of the formal structures that we did as kids, but still, it was never where we were going to church every week and all those other pieces. I think they found their balance there as parents, but for me, it was kind of very important to kind of listen, and with our children now, I think I try to give them that benefit of hearing just people talk through, what that means, what faith means, and what more structured religion means versus maybe people who don't quite believe that or will press against it. And I think it was really beneficial for me. But I think at the core of it, all these things kind of shape who you are. Yeah. And one thing that always kind of rang true to me was, didn't matter what either of them was talking about. It always came back to, all right, well, how are we trying to help people? How are we trying to do good? That was kind of the core of it. And I was like, oh, and as a kid, I remember just kind of always feeling that.
Well, tell me a little bit about the cultural difference. Like, I mean, you're Jamaican heritage and New Zealand heritage.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Very different. I would say not even just from a perspective of location and full culture, but also just size. My dad is an only child. And, my mom, had a very large family, and so, for me growing up, a lot of it was we would spend much more time in Jamaica just from how close it was and how easy to get back, but also just because we had just so much more family there, right? Yes. So my grandparents, yes, but all my aunts and uncles and extended family. So I really just got immersed into that in a big way versus New Zealand was, every 6 years you're over there and you're getting a feel of what that's like. But very different also because he's an only child, right? So it was much more, I'd see my grandparents, but we were kind of all just hanging out, just us, for a dinner or whatever it may be, versus anything you do on my mom's side, it was like, everybody was there, it seems like, so it's just a very different experience growing up in that sense. But you really, I think, got a sense of, for me, community, especially on my mom's side, just community was like, here you go, kid, you go over here and like, somebody's got you, you're okay. You're in this, you're in a safe space. And I think probably, I always know, I think my dad kind of enjoyed seeing that a little bit too and feeling that, especially in his space where it was just very different.
Did he encourage that?
You know what? I don't know if I'd say encourage in the sense of, my dad, relatively recently passed. And I remember just kind of always chatting with him about the difference I saw when my mom had passed. She passed earlier than my dad. And it was so distinct for me and my brother as well, where we noticed my dad, and, he would share this all the time. He absolutely, did not like social settings. Like he was very, introverted. He was also just didn't feel comfortable. He says my grandfather, which is true on his side too. But he was very much, did not like speaking in front of a group. Not at all. Like, I mean, to the point of, would bring anxiety and just not his thing. So I always saw that growing up. He'd be like, oh, how many people will be there? What's the, that was always the conversation. But it was really interesting because then once my mom passed, he wouldn't miss a thing. Never missed an event, a dinner, a holiday, any, oh, Dad, we're heading over. You want me to pick it? Yes, I'm coming. I'll meet you over at the house. I'm coming to, and I just think he really, not only did he kind of grow on him, but even with his own, fear or own feelings of anxiety, the feeling of being part of family was, kind of won out, I guess is the way to say it. So he never, as a kid, was never like, look at this, look what you've got. But he just, I think was feeling it or maybe learning it like we were as kids, because it's something he never had.
That's pretty cool. Was politics ever talked about? I mean, years. It's so funny to hear you say it about your dad. Both you and your brother are gifted public speakers. So that, was politics discussed at the house, or
not in the sense of, and probably due to the fact, my parents, again, not from this country, weren't like, this is Democratic views, this is Republican views. We never had this kind of party discussions or anything like that. As a kid, for me, what always came up that I thought of as politics as a kid was, first off, my dad would constantly always be like shocked when he was over here in America, saying like, I don't understand how more people aren't in unions. I don't understand how people don't realize there's more power collectively. He's like, I don't understand, and certainly my grandfather, his father, was a huge labor activist in New Zealand and very, outspoken and, involved and engaged. And so my dad always joked, it skipped that generation. But for him, it was more just, a questioning of like, and imparting on us of like, no, like, his perspective, this is wrong. Like you're better off, you're better off when you come together. You're better off when you have a group, you're better off when you kind of advocate together. So he would constantly, stress that every step of the way. And I saw it in his work experiences as well. He's an engineer. He worked for, Foster Wheeler and a lot of other companies for a lot of years. And he was all over the globe and certainly all over the United States. But the second half of his career, he worked for the Port Authority. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a moment when the group he was in was discussing unionizing. Mm-hmm. And I remember it really got to like a heated moment there where my dad was like, I cannot believe, they might not win this vote. Like we might not be a union. He's like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So we never ever like sat down and he's like, these are the politics of this or that. But it was definitely where I got a sense of, these are the ways that, you can have more power as a person, collective action. These are the things that you can, fight for as a group, to be successful. And I think all of those spaces, kind of certainly influenced who I am today. But it was more just through conversation.
So what motivated you to get into public service? I mean, was it a specific event? Was it a life-changing event? Like, how did you get like into public service?
You know what? I'd say I would say this. I mean, my mom being a teacher in Jamaica, math teacher, was a big reason why we're here for the great schools in New Jersey. But the other big influence as well, besides my parents, was my coach in college. I'm a hockey guy, which is another interesting story how we got into that. Yeah, that's another one. Neither of my parents have anything to do with hockey. No connection in any way. That one started with us being driving around, my brother, my dad, and I, on a really hot day. We were driving around in Morristown, and probably back then didn't have air conditioning in the car or whatever it was. It was a base model, whatever. And we were driving past a hockey rink, and my dad saw a big sign, and it said "free skating." And my dad looked at it and said, okay, A, it's free skating, and B, it's going to be cold in there because it's a hockey rink. He's like, let's go. And, I'd always joke with him. I said, Dad, that was the most expensive free skating you ever did, because we both got into it, and my dad as well, and took off, and we became big hockey players. But my coach in college was also a high school science teacher. And I just always remembered, you spend a lot of time, together in college, certainly with your coach, and you look up to someone there like that. And I would just always hear him telling stories. He'd be like, "Oh yeah, this is what the kids were like today. And this is what we did, and this is the interactions that I had." And I'd always be listening. I'm like, "Oh, that sounds kind of fun." Like, he'd tell the next story. I'm like, "Wow, that was great." And years of hearing that, I think really on me was said, "Oh, that sounds like it's fun. That sounds like it's fun, exciting, and I see how much joy you're getting from helping his students in that case." And for me, I said, "I think that might be something for me." And of course, here I am as a high school science teacher. Exactly what he is. Years later, but I think that's why I wanted to do it. I think it was the understanding of obviously how important it was to my mom, but also then seeing it and living it firsthand with my coach, that I became a teacher as well. And from there, you realize how much fun that is, and you're teaching kids each and every day. But I'd say in relation to even kind of stepping into some of those other roles, it's the reason why, right? It was literally sitting in class going, "Wait a minute, why don't I have more of a say in what I get to dissect in class every year? Like, who's making these decisions? I should be the one." And got more involved in the union side. And, it was the first kind of put to practice what my dad would say of like, got to be in a union and everything else. But I got involved in it, as opposed to being part of one. I got to say, "Hey, wait a minute, can I help with something? Or how do I get to go talk to the principal and all these things?" And so I got involved in that sense. And really through that opportunity, really got to know a lot of the other political world, right? Meaning, you get to know your mayor, you get to know your council people, you get to know county government, and so on and so forth. So really got involved in Passaic County, especially in the politics there. And then extension of that, I remember one day literally being like, "Wow, I'm really so involved, where I work. I should be more involved where I live," and really just took the time to start talking to neighbors and talking to those around me, saying, "Hey, what are your concerns? What are you seeing? What do you like about what's going on? What are some things you'd like to see change?" Did that for a while, and then literally one day driving home, I said, "You know what? I think I might run for council." And I stopped at Staples on the way home, picked up some cards, printed out some of the things I thought that were important that I'd been hearing about, called the current councilman at the time and said, "Hey, would you like to get together for a coffee?" And he said, "Absolutely not." He says, "But I'll meet you at the library for tea." I said, "Fair, okay." So I researched and brought a whole bunch of tea over to the up to the library, and he's like, "I got like 20 minutes." Of course, we ended up hanging out for like 2-3 hours, right? Just talking all about it, and him, conveying. And he says, "You know what?" He says, "I kind of like you. I'm not sure I'm going to run again, but I'd be interested in maybe helping you out." And I thought, "Thank you so much." I wasn't there for permission or anything like that, but I was really appreciative of him being able to have a conversation with me like that. And sure enough, I ended up running, and probably to people's surprise, as a newbie candidate, in a three-way race, was successful against some big name people in town. Won, and then was reelected, and then as mayor, and kind of went from there. So that's kind of how I realized the bridge of like, voice is important, making sure we have a say in decision making, seeing how structures work, getting to be right next to that, as it were, for many years, and then moving from just that space of being a solid advocate to being somebody who's in elected office themselves.
Listen, I'm hearing, a lot of, I think, what helped shape your political philosophy, but I'm not quite sure if I'm, you have to answer that question. What helped shape your political philosophy?
The answer there, and I know it's sounds kind of open, but I think everything helped
Hmm.
shape my philosophy. Yes, as I said, my parents, certainly my involvement in sports as well, and
Hmm.
certainly as my coach, certainly being an educator for so many years in the classroom with your kids, kind of becoming an advocate, public office, but every step along the way too. I just think professionally, this
Hmm.
gentleman Joe Chef, who really brought me under his wing
Hmm.
in county internal county union politics, but really, was like, "Hey, Sean, I know you're trying to do this, that. Who's going to have an impact on that? The mayor. You need to know these mayors. Oh, who's really going to have an impact on that? You need to know these. It's time for you, but you need to know these commissioners. And so on and so forth." So, a lot of the pieces I think that kind of all brought it together were from different spaces.
Hmm.
And I think I had the ability, maybe as we started this conversation, I had the ability to kind of listen a lot of times instead of having I know what I got to listen. I really had the benefit of having obviously great parents, but great mentors, others along the way who I could just learn from and listen while I tried to figure things out myself. But I think at the core of it all, was just the premise of, I just have a feeling, hey, the deck is always stacked against the little guy, just always is. And we're always the underdog. It's never fair. It's never right. Every experience I've ever had, like that's the deal. But we've got to figure out ways to kind of come together to push back and to be successful. And when we can and when we do, there is such gratification in that, and it can make such a big difference. So, all those pieces were vehicles to kind of do that work.
What was some of your proudest moments as mayor in Montclair? What would you say was some of your proudest moments?
Yeah, well, I'd say this, especially as mayor, first and foremost, whatever anyone thought the job was, or certainly what I thought the job was just totally upended, because of COVID and everything else, right? And I just remember, you're a council person for 8 years, you're right there, you're seeing how things happen. It's never the same as if you're in that seat for sure. But then to step in and COVID to hit, it was really just. I think for probably any mayor or anyone else who was in a position at that time, it was a lot. You're dealing with families who've lost loved ones. You're dealing with, you're dealing with businesses who are struggling. You're dealing with just challenges that you said, wow, this wasn't what the job was, a month ago. So that was something where I will say, and I use that to answer the question of, I was really proud that even in that moment, worked to kind of look at the resources we had around us, look to see, what supports were there to help people navigate that space, both from a health perspective and making sure people were okay and making sure we partnered with our hospital and other things to kind of coordinate and to provide, whether that be the testing or treatments, et cetera, so all of that was really important in that moment, especially, and it wasn't something that was expected. So, kind of proud that, that matters then, right? It just matters a huge piece of it. But along the lines, I think there's so many things that gave me experiences where I say they were so varied, but they showed to me how important things can be. I say that in that, one of my earlier experiences was finally getting a 4-way stop sign at an intersection, right? And you hear something like that, which would be my first reaction, like, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, how hard could this be? Pretty hard. Let me tell you, pretty hard. Like so many state regulations and testing you have to do, and this study and that study, and I just remember, residents were like, "But Sean, there's these accidents happening, and we're worried our kids are out front, and all these things." And you're working it, and you're like, I can't believe it's this hard. But when we finally got it done, when those residents were like, "You got to come by, we want to thank you," I'm like, "No, you got to come by." And I remember getting to the street there, and all 4 corners, like everybody's outside, just like, "Thank you so much," applauding and cheering. Yeah. And it wasn't about that, but it was about like, I got to see how important and how much joy like all of them were experiencing, because here at town government, like we got something done that affected their lives. Yeah. And, whether it be that or, whether it be, quite frankly, coming through COVID and we saw, massive rent increases, and very, really, really proud of being able to introduce the first ever rent control in Montclair. Yeah. For a different reason, really exciting, but the impact again and the importance, yes, but navigating it through a very progressive community. But all those same spaces when I'd been at, all these folks' houses who were having fundraisers for Biden at the time or whoever else, but all of a sudden when it was time for rent control, oh no, that's our building. Like, no, we don't need that here, And so it was navigating that politically, engaging the community, building the support, getting the political pressures, it was not easy. So for other reasons, that was also, there were lawsuits, lawsuits. Yeah. I mean, there was, every effort made to not let that happen, so, but then to be successful there, really, really rewarding to say, look at the difference we made for so many residents who are now going to be able to afford to stay in Montclair, and not get, have such a burden, for renting.
Sean, it's interesting because, whether folks notice or not, Montclair is a very diverse city. And so fighting for rent control, looking at New Jersey as a diverse state. Now you're on a statewide level in terms of the teachers union, but you also throw your hat in the ring to run for governor. So what was the impetus of that? I mean, you've had the experience as a mayor, run one of the largest unions in the state. So what made you, what was your thinking around throwing your hat in this, in this politically charged
Yeah,
space?
well, politics, Ella, it's just so easy. It's no sharp elbows. So why
Mhm.
not? No, but seriously, it was. I think for me, really recognizing that this truly is our chance to do something a little bit differently.
Mhm.
Like I am not naive to the situation that we usually find ourselves in. I say that meaning as I kind of stepped over into the public elected office side, right? Meaning as an educator, I got elected. It's elected through all the members of our union,
Mhm.
200,000 educators. I had to, campaign throughout the state and get that to happen. But when I stepped over, and I did at the same time, ran for council and then
Mhm.
mayor, I really just saw how much the system is set up where it is really hard for the average person to
Mhm.
participate and to be successful, right? From the time you've got to give, from the money involved to get elected, from like all the reasons, even at the lowest levels, right? You're trying to become a council person, you're trying to become a mayor. It is really, really hard. And for me, I looked at it and being an advocate for so many years and then having the opportunity to serve publicly, I looked at it and said, this is truly our chance. It is rare where things happen to align, right? Look,
Mhm.
I'm very fortunate to be the leader of a large labor organization that is very supportive of making sure we elect somebody who's pro-public education and supportive of our working families. I also understand that it's kind of unique that I've had this public service, for 12
Mhm.
years, that I've got that experience as well to rely on. In addition to, in my NJ capacity, being all over the state. I've been, all the way, northern parts of our state, southern, east, west, kind of understand the dynamics. Putting all that together, said, well, this is truly our chance for someone who has a lived experience that's more like ours, certainly mine, right? Um, to be elected to a position where we are not the ones, fighting to get in that room to advocate for a few minutes on an issue, but to be the ones making the decision.
Mhm.
And for me, that driver around like, wow, the ability to make a difference here in this moment is an opportunity
Mhm.
where how can you not say this is important for us to be in this
Mhm.
in this space in this moment,
Yeah.
and that was a big piece of it. I know what's on the line. I know the issues that are out there. I know there's always countless amounts of things we can continue to work on and make better, but this is our chance to be the ones making those decisions.
Mhm. Now, how do you, your experience in education, wanted to ask you this question, given all that you've done in this public space, like, New Jersey schools are rated some of the top, but our urban schools are really struggling. Like, what do you think about that aspect of New Jersey's education?
I think about it's not just a question of education. I think
Mhm.
it's a question of everything when we're having those conversations. I think that's one of the criticisms that we've gotten, even on the NJs. We really center and focus on being a justice-centered union.
Mhm.
There's plenty of folks out there who says, "Hey, stay in your lane.
Mhm.
You should be talking about reading and writing, and why are you worried about housing over here? Why are you worried about jobs? Why are you talking about the minimum wage? And all these other things." And for me, as a leader of the organization, have always said, no, this is literally about the success of our students, right?
Mhm.
All of these conversations, it's about the success of our students, and certainly our state and our communities and otherwise, right?
Right.
But you can't have one conversation without the other. So when you ask that question, you say, which I'll be the first to say as well, we've got best schools in the nation.
Mhm.
Um, do we have the equity everywhere? Do we have the opportunity? Not the same, right?
Right.
Not the same, right? And a lot of that is because, well, look at the opportunities in each of our communities. Look at the supports that are
Mhm.
provided to each of the opportunity of our communities. Look at the burdens that are put on communities versus other communities, right? You look at all of that. It's important conversations that we need to have, because it could be, you want to talk about environmental impact,
Mhm.
right? And you say, well, look, Sean, why isn't this school doing as well as the other one? Well, let's look at attendance, right?
Mhm.
Let's look at how many students are out. But why is that? Well, maybe they're suffering from higher rates of asthma. Maybe they've got other health indicators. Why? Because take a look at the community. Take a
Mhm.
look at where all of our incinerators are placed. Take a look at
Right.
all the other things that we know that
Mhm.
maybe people don't at first thought like equate to success of a student or thrive. The ability for a community to thrive. All of those things are related. So for me, I think it's important that when we have these conversations, they're connected,
Mhm.
and we say that we've got to address all of them if we
Yeah.
want to have success in any of them. And that's, I think, a role that we have, an opportunity to have as the NJA, but certainly that I hope to have as governor.
Yeah, how do you do that in this politicized climate right now? Like, how do you navigate that? And what do you think, New Jersey's future in terms of, moving forward with a state that's one of the most diverse states in the nation, but
Mhm.
also one of the most segregated,
Mhm.
and have these polar opposites of political philosophy. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I don't know exactly where we go on that.
Mhm.
I'll be the first to say, right? I mean, this is, I mean, I'm the same as everyone else, right? You can throw on the TV at times and just be, overwhelmed
Yeah.
and just frustrated and worried, scared for our democracy, and certainly what it means for us working together as Americans, and all of those things. I think so many others do as well. I do think though that it all starts with having conversations and centering and grounding yourself on some of our common values.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really fortunate and thankful that one of the spaces that I know we all start from a space of agreement on is, hey, you want the best for your kid. I know you do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what, I don't care what anything else you want. I want to talk to you about. You want the best for your kid.
Right.
And I want the best for my kid. It's also, we all want the best for our children. Oh, let's start with that. Right. And I remember from an educational space, we might be, even where I worked, might be politically different than where I was mayor, and all those pieces. But I always had great relationships because went in and said, I know at the core, you believe in that.
Right.
And I believe in that. Let's start from there. And let's talk about beyond that, what we can do, and add a piece on that we're okay with, and add another piece on, and kind of get to a spot where we can be successful and move things forward. And I think I've seen that in my role at NJA, being all over the state. The values are there. There may be different ways people approach them or get to different goals or think about things, but and you have to know those nuances to get things done, no question. And we're a state like any other where you have to navigate the politics, including trying to get policy accomplished. But when you understand that and can kind of move some of those pieces around, I think that's where we go. It's through conversation. It's through building on some shared values and what we know is some spaces of agreement, and continuing to grow that. And I think that's what you have to kind of hope is successful moving forward.
What role would you say government play in really dealing with social justice issues? Like what are your thoughts about that?
A big role. I mean, huge role. I will say it's an interesting one for me, I guess front and center, because we were kind of talking about it a second ago too, when you talk about housing, right? And I just remember for years even having conversations with some of my elected officials, before I was in elected office at the time, and just having conversations around the amount of affordable housing we had, and where it was located and all those other pieces. And I just remember having some conversations where I'm like, well, and you're careful how you say things or frame things to people, but I would have conversations and say, well, listen to me, does it seem right to you? Like we have a process where you can not build your affordable housing and have another community do that and put it all in another community and not have to do it. Well, yeah, because this is what we're doing and we're giving this money, and there would always be like a rationale for it, an explanation. And at the end of the day, I think that's where we as a society have to kind of get into like, okay, no. That I get it, and I'm not calling you racist. I'm not saying those things, but the policies that we're continuing, or the pieces that we continue to fight for, that maybe have systemic racism kind of built in, are having an impact. Right, they're having an impact right now, and we've got to change that. We've got to break that down. So when you ask, do municipalities have a role? Yeah, absolutely. There's a perfect example. Housing, one of them, right? And we're having those fights right now.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of those things. So I think it's an opportunity though to hopefully reset this around, guys. Like this is our chance to also recognize that you talk to any single person and you say, do you need housing that's affordable? And every single, oh yeah, absolutely. I know my kid can't afford this. And then you just tweak it a little bit and say, well, how about some affordable housing? Whoa, I'm not sure we need affordable housing. I'm like, well, what do you mean? So, but I think reframing it around, hey folks, like let's get to a place again where we realize that every single one of our communities needs to have housing. We need to have housing that people can afford to live in. We want to make sure our communities reflect the diversity we have in the state. It makes us stronger, right? Look at Montclair. I'm like, people love Montclair because of our rich diversity, right? We got to make sure we embrace that. We got to make sure we help that, right? So I think it's having those conversations around, hey, folks, don't look at this as something you need to be afraid of or worried about. You are actually saying the same thing, maybe in different ways. But we've got to get to a place where you kind of see that connection point, and let's find a way to kind of move forward in a way that's successful.
So what would you say is the future of New Jersey if you were, be so fortunate to become governor? What would you say the future of New Jersey would be?
Yeah. For me, it's being laser focused on understanding that New Jersey is a great place to live, right? It's a great place to live. It's got so many things, again, start with those great schools. I say that with 2 young kids myself, but you start with that, wonderful communities to live in, things to take advantage of both in the, summertime, wintertime, it's just a wonderful place. But it's a hard place to afford,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I do say that from my lived experience of a dad being away for months at a time, trying to send money home just because it was expensive, and I do say that, when I represent educators and certainly, families in our communities, and you see how hard it is to kind of make ends meet, and people are making tough decisions each and every day. For me, it would be about, okay, well, let's understand the great things that are there, but they're not that special if people don't have the time or money to enjoy
Yeah.
them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what does that mean? We got to keep more money in people's pockets.
Absolutely.
And allow them the time and money to be able to go enjoy the things that make New Jersey special. How can you do that? You could do that by either helping them make more money, right? Or spend less, keep more, right? And I think those are spaces where we've got to be really focused, right? The big drivers are, when you look at, again, my young kids, you look at quality early education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or childcare, that's really, really expensive. How do we help families in that space where we lessen those costs, keep more money, keep more money in your pocket, right? Okay. As they grow, you want to be able to keep a little more money too to prepare for college and everything else, should they choose to go. That's a big piece of it. Housing, as I mentioned before, really, really proud of what we did in Montclair with rent control, but it's got to be more than that. Even the multifamily house, like I was able to buy as my first home, not an option anymore. With so many corporate entities buying these up, what are we doing to make sure the market's there for people who are trying to be first-time homeowners, right? What are we doing to make sure that those people moving in from New York City, wherever else, who are jacking up those housing costs, home prices, how are we making space where there's still affordable housing for people who want to get into a home? Rents, of course, as I mentioned before. So housing, huge piece of it. Another big one on families, healthcare costs, right? And really, really proud of the fact that in this role as an NJA, president, able to not only design, healthcare plans that are quality and affordable, but also, instead of the usual, no, you pay, no, you pay, no, you pay, able to really navigate a political system to get it implemented where the user, right, the employees save billions of dollars and the employers save billions of dollars, right? That is a dynamic that I don't think many of the other candidates have had the opportunity to do, but I have as well, right? So when you look at some of these big drivers of what takes money out of people's pockets, how do we make sure people keep them in, right? And I think the role of government is to help everybody along the way. And it's funny because when I'm in spaces that maybe people don't think of as traditional, like, education spaces, I'll speak to like a business association, right? And we'll be chatting, but I'll say, hey, no, listen, the same things that are driving up your costs, whether it's the red tape you want to call it, or the having to duplicate things because this system doesn't talk to us. It's the same thing we face in education when they dump more and more stuff on us. Nobody talks to us about it, slows us down, doesn't allow us to do our jobs well. That has an impact in the kids' education, has an impact in your bottom line, right? But they're the same things we're talking about. So as governor, I want to make sure we're focusing on those spaces, make New Jersey more affordable for more folks, and allow them to enjoy the wonderful things that make New Jersey so special.
So it's so funny to me, to this whole conversation and looking at your career, you're the leader of one of the largest unions in the state. But early on, you talked about how much your dad talked about unions. Yeah. And do you find that curious that you're like that? Sometimes we don't think, and we always say our parents, I'm not like my dad, I'm not like my mom, my parents don't have an impact on me.
Right.
But here you are.
Well, think about it. I'll add to that too. So my mom was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a teacher. And my dad always talked about unions, and I'm the head of the largest union in the state, right? So it's not lost on me that those things kind of came together. I'm like, wow, that's pretty much, pretty much it right there. But yeah, I don't think it. Look, I'm very mindful. Like there are very few people who ever get to be the president of the NJEA, and I happen to be the one. I happen to be the first Black male ever president of NJEA. I happen to be, there's a lot of things you have to navigate. Yeah. There, we're not unlike, the state and nation writ large, right? In some of those dynamics. So I don't take it like, oh yeah, of course. Look, my dad was. No, it was. It took a lot to get to these spots, but. It's never lost on me, and certainly when, my dad got to see more of it, but, my dad would kind of see me in these roles, he'd be like, wow, you're doing what, you're doing a lot of what we kind of always talked about.
The foundation that your parents set for you.
Yeah, no question.
I'm learning a lot about you, bro. That's it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that the foundation that your parents set for you follow that, Speaking of that, if a young person today wanted to get into this space, what advice would you give them?
You know what I'd say? I'd say do it. Just do it. That's a little simplistic there, but I'd say, for me, I've had the real advantage of great mentors, like I said before, too. So I've had the opportunity to kind of sit and learn, and listen, be brought into spaces, helped along the way. So hopefully trying to find mentors, finding others who you can, talk to and learn from is important. But I also think, kind of like that step of driving, home on past the Staples and just saying, yeah, I'm going to stop in and you just go do it, because there's never like the right time.
Yeah.
It's never like, well, now's the moment. Like, no, but no, why not now? Why not right now? Like, why don't you go have that conversation you're thinking about having, or why not go down and see if there's an opening on that, library board or something else, and oftentimes you'll find there is, or there's an opportunity, and I think so for anyone who wants to get involved, I think just do it, go try, get involved. But I'd also kind of back that up with, please do it, to everyone else, because I think the bigger challenge we face is not, a young person saying, I want to be involved and, how do I do it? There's that disconnect between being involved and the impact on your life. And trying to get more young folks to not to say understand, because it's not on them to understand, but to hopefully see a connection between being involved and being able to make a difference and change things. And hopefully we can keep moving people in that space.
Well, final question we always ask our guests here on Navigating Realities: what is one of your favorite quotes and why?
It's interesting you say that. I probably think of one that I remember I carried around with me, through college too. I think I still have it a while, but Teddy Roosevelt's, comment, right? And it was actually, everybody talks about it as the man in the arena quote that he had, but it's really, I think, what is it? It's about the republic. It's about the supporting a republic, or I believe was the official title or something like that. And I just remember for me, hearing it, and it just meant like you got to be in the game. Like you got to be in the game. It's like so important for all of us. Like this is a participatory democracy. Like you've got to be involved, right? And that doesn't mean like everyone's got to be elected to this, everyone's got to be elected to that. That's not the kind of involved we mean. But it does mean if we want to be successful collectively, we've all got to be engaged in some way. You can't leave it to that person, or leave it to this person and hope that it works out, or feel you can disconnect and it's going to be just fine. It might not. Like we really all have to say, in what small way can we be a part of this? And then, we own some of that, and that's very rewarding, but it also helps us, to move in a direction that I think is going to be just beneficial and important if we want to keep what we have.
Yeah, I think I look at it, sometimes I think about it this way. People always say, I want to have an impact in the world. I want to have an impact in the world. And we forget the impact in the world is not necessarily global. It's your world. The people in your community, the people that you're confronted, the influence that you have is not necessarily a global impact, but it's your space, your world, your sphere, your influence. And I think when we look at it like that and take small pieces of what we are here to do, then we can contribute. Like you say, getting engaged. Sometimes people saying getting engaged, they think it's just overwhelming. It's just too much. But just look at it. Maybe it's your home. Maybe it's your immediate family. Maybe it's folks you're in college with, folks you're going to school with. Maybe it's just community members, or someone who mentor you in hockey. Like who's that coach and who's that sports person, just having an impact. So I really appreciate you coming, man.
Thanks for having me.
Learned a lot about you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate it, man. That was great.
Thanks for having me
great. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. I'm Reverend Eric Dobson, and this was Navigating Realities, where dialogue meets understanding. Follow and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and tune in on all streaming platforms. See you next time.